I'm Tiffany,
And I'm Kelly.
and we're your revenue insiders.
We have a very exciting guest for us today, Melina Giakas, who is joining us from Clay. So we are going to talk a little bit of Clay on enablement, enablement on Clay, Clay on Clay. It's going to be a very interesting discussion. Melina started as a team of one in enablement and is now growing a team. I found her on LinkedIn because she is growing her team by 3 new team members. How many team members do you have now, or will you have?
So we're actually building the team by 5. We have 3 in seat right now, so we'll be a team of 9.
Which is so fun to hear because we hear about enablement teams being made smaller over and over again. But here's an AI company really investing in enablement. And I love that. So, Lena, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We did a call a couple weeks ago and talked about a lot. But one of the things we talked about, especially, is what Clay has changed the way that you think about enablement. And I'd love to just start off with that. How are you using Clay in your own enablement?
Of course. Yeah, I remember last time we spoke, you had asked me that of what changed when I joined Clay, and I would say just about everything that I knew about enablement, I needed to really think through differently. In terms of how we use Clay, so Clay is a data orchestration and data enrichment tool. So we give our customers access to 170 plus data providers. They have access to the best data, and then they can pretty much orchestrate any creative workflow that they can think of. So from an enablement perspective, I have access to all of our Gong data, Salesforce data, really anything that is going in or going on in the pre or post sales side of the business. So I leverage it a lot in terms of diving deeper into analytics, figuring out what's really going on during that full customer life cycle so that I can help inform some of the strategies and where we focus. So some of that is automating our account research, our handoff notes, making sure GTMEs have the information that they need via Slack or right on the call.
It's so fascinating. There are so many use cases for AI and enablement. And I think, like Kelly, you and I have talked about this. There's this like fear of it taking over, people's jobs completely. Like we can just, Notion can do this and,
Mhm.
Notebook LLM can build these things. And you start to worry about the place of enablement in that type of role. But it's so interesting to hear like leveraging the data and the orchestration of it, which is how I think about it from a RevOps perspective, to be more strategic is such a great reframe of enablement with AI. I'm curious from your perspective, are you with your team growing? How does the rest of the company view you? Are they looking for you to push to be more automated, or have you really like stood up and found that voice in the data strategic side of leveraging the AI solutions?
Yeah, I would say so. Every week in our team meeting, we actually have 30 minutes dedicated to AI workflows. So I do really push my team to think about how can we change the way that we do enablement? What are the different templates that we can create? What are the ways that we can just increase efficiencies in terms of the learnings that we do or getting information out there to the field? But I'd say from a business perspective, we are more strategic partners to our leads. So actually, a lot of what I work on with them is sometimes pulling back on AI. So we say, we only want to implement AI and automations if we've driven those skills and understand that the team is really proficient in certain areas. So we have go to market engineers, and they are a mix of a seller and a solutions engineer. And so they'll always ask me, Melina, can't we automate the pain? Can't we fill in these Salesforce fields? Can't we just automate who the champion is? And we absolutely can. But kind of my role on the enablement side is that they need to prove for a quarter that they really understand these concepts and can truly identify those champions before we go ahead and automate it.
I love that, like forcing people to fill it out. That's a very different take than where everyone wants all of us to go in the data world. I think when I recently left my last job, we were trying to automate as many fields as possible, but that's a great perspective on that.
Well, that's what we had done initially. And then I think that we had realized through our QBRs and just deeper dives into the deals themselves that there were some areas that we needed to pull back on to really just drive a little bit more skills development in.
One area that I'm seeing a lot of AI adoption in the enablement is onboarding. Oh, and I think you have a hot take here on what is good onboarding in the world of AI. What are your thoughts there?
It's interesting. I remember last we spoke, you were asking kind of, is there a need for facilitation and what does that look like? Clay itself is such a technical product. So we do still have a lot of live in person sessions. We actually fly everyone to New York for their first week of onboarding because we really believe in that kind of in person classroom style learning. From there, I think, there's a lot of times where we give folks async learning and the ability to just work it into their week based on their own development. But really, for onboarding, we value kind of having everybody in person and really setting aside the time to be actually building in the product.
It is so the
Yeah.
just the people, like getting people to know people and work as a
Mhm.
team. Whenever I talk to teams that don't have that critical moment early in their tenure, they always feel just very disconnected, I feel like.
Yeah. We're very big on cohorts, and always if there's someone starting outside a cohort, I'm like, "No, but they won't have their buddies, they won't have their friends." That is so important just to be able to have that trusted set of peers that you can Slack if you're confused or lost or just wanna connect with and go, out and hang out with as well.
I mean, it's a big investment for the company to make to pull everyone into like an offline space, like in real life. And that's was
Mhm.
the challenge I feel like for a lot of companies coming out of COVID is they figured out how to do it virtually because they had to. And now they don't have this big T&E expense every month or quarter, depending on how you were cohorting. How are you kind of proving out the value of doing that? Are there certain metrics that you're relying on that show the value of that in-person time together? Is that just like a fundamental belief from like the Clay organization itself?
Yeah, I'd say it's more fundamental to the organization. We're very in person. Everybody is in person in New York and San Francisco and London. So at least 3 days a week, everyone is together. We still have our company all hands all together in this big space that we are quickly outgrowing. So I think just from a culture perspective, it's really important to have kind of that human connection with one another.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a fascinating to hear because I think Clay is just so it's such a big name in the AI space in the go-to-market world right now, and AI is just so synonymous with like the efficiencies and improvements and
Hmm.
not always cost reduction, but I think like some of the people cost efficiency reduction. So that's yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's a very special place to work, and I'm really glad that I found myself here.
So you've obviously changed the way you think about enablement a lot in the world of AI and joining Clay. If you were talking to someone who is either newer to enablement or is working at a company that has so many restrictions that they can't use AI in the way they want, where would you tell them to start?
Yeah, I would say I really believe that most of the tools that we have some AI capability to them. So that's, I was talking to someone recently and kind of the first place that I'd recommended that they start, whether it be in Notion or in Gong or even um, just some of these like free tools that we have access to. There are always ways that I think that we can think about doing things differently. And I would say trying to think through like what are the repeatable automated tasks that are happening and what can you cut or do differently is kind of how I would challenge them to kind of rethink their work.
In that same, I'm going to say Notion on Notion now, you talked a little bit about how you're using Notion
Hmm.
content creation. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Could you walk us through that?
Sure. A couple of different ways. So Notion AI is fantastic. I use it a lot for building content, but rather than coming up with different prompts or different structures, making sure that every team, whether you're pre-sales, post-sales, and then even the segments within each, I want them to have a very consistent experience when it comes to playbooks or trainings or whatever content they might be engaging with. So we've actually templatized a lot of our prompting so that that way it's just a page in Notion they can make a copy of, can drop in the call transcript and just say, fill in the template. And that way, it's really a repeatable framework that we can leverage AI versus kind of starting from scratch every time and having it look like a bunch of random kind of AI pages and they're not quite sure what to trust.
And you're also doing that to tell you what needs to be updated, right? So, in
Hmm.
terms of outdated content, content governance is such a messy, messy space. How are you using it in that way?
Yeah, we have somebody fantastic on our team who is all about agents, which is incredible. So actually we use Notion as our CMS. And so what we did is created Notion agents that actually scan through all of our key Slack channels. And then it goes into a database and it creates recommendations of what content needs to be updated. It will update that content automatically as well, but we like to keep human in the loop so that we can go ahead, approve those changes, and then all of our content is automatically updated It's especially helpful in the product side for how quickly Clay moves and evolves. Even navigation within the platform for some of our playbooks, it will say, hey, Melina, it's no longer a toggle. It's now, an icon on the left. I can update the playbook for you. Those are just easy things to miss in Slack, especially when a company is moving so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great way to use AI in general to like help with content management because it's been such a messy thing. Like so many people want to add layers of AI on top of the content they're building, but if you don't figure out like how you scale the governance, like it just becomes a mess so quickly, at least in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, Melina. I mean, obviously, that's a great use of another AI tool outside of just like Clay. Have you tried any AI tools or functionality that just haven't worked for you that you kind of had to walk away from because it wasn't creating the right behaviors or driving the right next steps for the team?
The one I still haven't nailed down is AI role play, and I really want it to work. And I've tried so many different tools, tested so many out with my team. I was talking to somebody about this actually last week, and I wonder if like no matter how great you get the AI working, if people just don't like to role play with a robot. Because I keep getting such negative feedback from my field team, kind of regardless of how good the tool is or how relevant it is to
Mhm.
what they need to practice. It's kind of like those service bots that they have that if it says, responded by AI, the NPS was like 1, and then once they gave it a name like Alyssa, it went up to 9. So I wonder how much of it is actually that.
Yeah, I mean, people might just not like role play in general.
Yeah.
I fear no one likes to admit that they're bad at something, and it's such a highlighter when you have
Mhm.
role play. Period.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had different experiences with AI role play. I'm actually using it with a customer right now, and it's been highly successful.
Amazing.
But we're using MCPs to connect to Claude, to connect to backend data. So it's a very personalized experience. But yes, I do think either are people who just don't like role play, or you have people that like, but that's not what my customer said last week. And they don't realize that part of the role play is just like putting yourself in different experiences. And it's not always going to feel exactly the same. But when you're new, you expect the conversation to run in the same way. Okay. What else? You're growing. So talk to me about how you built the business case to grow your team. What did that
Yeah.
conversation look like?
It took a little while. So it took, a quarter or 2 of just working and building and trying to prove the value and make sure that enablement was tied to the right initiatives. Helped roll out our sales process, find different gaps and opportunities within the business. I would say the biggest lever was having access to data and just figuring out what AI and tools I could use to really spot different opportunities for the business. So I used our closed loss dashboard in Clay that we built, pulls in all of the everything from Salesforce, everything from Gong. And from there, we had a new tool that came out called Sculptor. You can basically chat with the table. And I used it to uncover all of the gaps in data points and say, hey, 52% of our opportunities last quarter were actually unqualified. And we didn't know that ahead of time because we had no roadmap, we had no sales process. So that's kind of what I use to highlight the data driven ways that we are leaning in from an enablement perspective. And then try to do that as well when we're talking about headcount and capacity and the different projects that we would be able to tie ourselves to if we had a bit more bandwidth.
So when you think about those roles you're hiring for, what are those roles? Like, how did you define
Yeah, what they need to look.
the person you needed and yeah, based on where you're headed as an organization?
Yeah, we are hiring a lot of roles. And I would say what I look for is somebody that is AI forward, to your point, Kelly, even if they don't have access to, the tech stack that we might have at Clay, that they're at least thinking through different ways of implementing AI, different ways of doing enablement that we've done in the past. And in terms of where we decided to fit these roles or to sit them within the org, so I'm building it out in terms of specialized areas. So have somebody for product enablement, have somebody for GTME enablement, for technical enablement. And the reason why I mapped it that way is just to scale with the business. We are hiring like crazy, not just in enablement, but within all of these other teams within the business. So it's really important that we can match the pace of those teams and their needs as well.
With that structure of scaling, which makes total sense from your perspective, I'm curious how you're going to keep the connectivity from like a holistic perspective across all of those team members as you grow because I think even thinking about the RevOps side of things, like how we build teams, that's where it gets like difficult is that push and pull of like leaning into the business design, but then
Hmm.
having standardized ways that you templatize how different
Yeah.
AI tools work or how you interact with the team. Is that something you're just taking on right now in the interim, or do you have any, tips on how you think you're going to keep everyone kind of as a centralized team, even though they're supporting unique groups?
Yeah. And do you mean in terms of just the enablement team or our go to
Yeah,
market
in terms
teams?
of the enablement team, yeah.
Luckily, there's so much overlap between these different areas of the business. So even this week, we're doing a session on champion building for our go to market engineers. We're also doing it for our post sales teams. In terms of the product as well, there's so much overlap. So we recently launched something called Clay Ads, which is fantastic. When you think about that new product, it's relevant to all of those groups, right? Technical enablement, product enablement, GTM enablement. So they kind of have to work together. Otherwise, they're all kind of building in silos
Mm,
there. So, thinking of it to be a bit project based. So, they buddy up in terms of an initiative and then are building the foundation that we then specialize from there based on these different groups. So, while a live session may happen separately, we are working on the foundational content together. So, at least about 60% is likely the same. And then that additional 40% is specialized by role.
yeah, that makes sense.
It's really important because I think what I've seen in so many enablement teams recently is they've specialized similar to what you're doing, but then those specialized teams do not talk to each other. And so it's like a
Hmm.
silo within a giant go to market silo that's already happening.
Hmm.
And then you're having to go back and just teach each other how to work with each other. And so I think you're setting a really strong foundation for like what that looks like. I'm curious, based on that, then, when you think about how fast play is moving, how fast you're growing, all of these things are happening. How are you thinking about prioritization?
Yeah. We get so many requests every day, and everyone's request is the most important, right? So, what we do is, again, we try to look for wider trends based on what's incoming. We do quarterly planning. So, number one, is it tied to one of our top initiatives for the quarter or the broader initiatives of the business? From there, if not, we kind of look at, okay, how often is this coming up from not even just requests from the field, but we're looking in Gong, we're looking in Clay, we're trying to find the root of the data. So competitive intel is one that comes up pretty frequently for me personally. There we compete against like 100 different competitors, which is a very unique challenge, at least for my experience. And so I'll look and see, okay, well, how many times is this being mentioned by the customers? How often are we actually coming up against them in an evaluation? And who else from the team is curious to learn about this tool? That's kind of how we'll start to prioritize. And then from a leadership perspective, that's a little bit different. So I'll ask them what are three things we want them to remember and what's one thing we want them to do differently. The one thing we want them to do differently is usually where the prioritization happens. That's usually sometimes where we'll say, well, actually, nothing. And then, right. Then, well, what's the purpose of kind of this initiative or this
Yeah.
training if everything is fine, if it continues the way it is?
I That's a great tool for prioritization and for putting that like back on the leaders and your business partners. I love the one thing that you want them to do differently. That's a great tool. I'm curious from the field as well. So you get all these asks and I love again the data element of like curating it all to like really understand them. We all know and love the sales teams that we support and the ancillary teams. What are they pushing back on? Like, we're having this conversation. Kelly and I can geek out for probably more than the time we'll spend talking on like how you're building this. But where are you seeing the most friction or pushback from the field and what you're working on them with?
Not necessarily friction or pushback, but I would say a great way that they're pushing us is that they really want to have access to all these tools and they want to know the best ways to use them. So they want to know what cloud skills they should be using and how to use it, or how to build decks in Lovable, or how to host all of their super cool codex pages. So that I would say is one way that it's like a healthy friction, I guess you could say, of how can we best enable an AI forward go to market engineering team. And that's really something that we need to push ourselves on as well to be at the front of these things that came out like an hour ago.
It's such a unique challenge because I think so many enablement leaders are struggling to get their teams to just adopt AI,
Hmm.
use it in their workflows, and in the best way possible, your teams are pushing you to move faster in how they can adopt it. And so it's a unique challenge of like bringing those two worlds together and figuring like how do we slow down to speed up, but also how do we make sure you have the ability to leverage all of the tools in front of you?
Yep, absolutely.
And I mean, I think going back to what we were saying earlier, there's like a fear in the enablement teams
Hmm.
world where like adopting too much AI starts to like replace, like you have someone on your historical team whose job is like content governance or content curation. And like if you're using Notion agents to do half of that, that person gets a little naturally protective of what their job is. And so it's just such a different place, I think, than so many enablement teams that I've talked to recently are in and the challenges they're trying to solve. I think it's a great example of a very AI forward build.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I tell my team and I make sure they all know is that all of our jobs will look totally different in 3 months, 6 months, a year. And they have to get really comfortable with that. And it's not a threatening thing, it's an opportunity. And how cool is it to be at a place where they're supportive of that as well? So, even to your point of the content creation, great, you found an agent. Like, we reward that. We want you to find efficiencies, we want you to leverage AI, and there will always be more work to be done.
Yes, there will be.
What is the most exciting project you're working on right now?
Most exciting project. That's a great question. I would say probably some of the content updating that we had just spoken about. So making sure that that is really in a great place, that it is just kind of running on its own since that's newer for us. The other exciting slash interesting challenge is that we have all these agents now. They're all running. We have different Slack channels that you can ask about legal questions or go to market questions. But now we have this unique challenge that wait, there's so many agents. How, like, how, where should I ask this question? Which one does what? So it's almost like, oh my gosh, we've released all these. Now we need to pull back. So my next challenge that I'm really interested in is figuring out agent strategy and just, yeah, how do you set it up in a way that is keeps the field moving quickly and it's very clear where to go for what.
You need an agent to tell you what agent to
Yeah,
use.
right. Exactly. That's actually what happened.
Oh my God.
I'd love to take a step back and learn a little bit about you, Melina, and how you ended up in Clay and what your career journey has been leading up to this point.
Yeah, I feel so fortunate that Clay found me. And at first, I didn't know much about Clay. As part of the interview process, you come in person. And when I got to the office, I just realized what a special and incredible place this was. And that was really the moment that I realized, like, wow, I really want to work there. From a career perspective, I started my career in customer success. I mean, a couple of jobs before that, I was in PR and a bunch of random things, but that was really the beginning of my tech career. And from there, what I loved most was talking to customers, running QBRs, helping them learn the product, which was kind of an easy transition into an enablement role that was open at Sailthrough. Stayed there for a long time, loved it, ended up growing into a leader there, and then continued on enablement ever since. I built out the team at Branch and then came to Clay to do the same thing.
So amazing. There are a lot of listeners that are going to be very jealous of, I think, the flexibility and just talking through how people are rewarded for finding new efficiencies. For so long, I think everyone wanted to keep the wheels on the bus and just going in the same direction. And it's really fun that you get to be creative and have the space to do that.
Yeah, I feel very, very lucky.
Okay, so you talked a little bit earlier about how you're using Clay in your enablement team and your processes. Again, like I could geek out on Clay. I just bought it as part of like a prior cycle at my last role that I was in, and so I'm a big fan of the tool. How are your sales teams using Clay internally as part of their processes?
Yes. So they use Clay from everything from building pipeline to execution of their deals. So oh God, sorry, hold on. I told you I don't know how to work the studio. I should have asked someone. Okay, we're back. So, how are my field team using Clay? Okay. So, they're using Clay from the moment they reach out to a prospect to the moment that they close. We actually have a full day dedicated to pipeline generation. It's called Clay Day. And so, we set up plays every week that are built in Clay. And so they can use it to find the right people, target them with the right messaging, and have all of that at their fingertips so that they can really focus on the strategy. Once they go ahead, do that outbound, somebody says, yep, sounds great. Would love to talk about Clay. They're actually served up pre-call meeting notes the night before. So they get everything they need to know about that customer's business, about who they're talking to, anything that's been in the news lately, something that would historically take a seller hours to come up with. I actually ran a 2-week badge probably about 3 years ago when none of this was available, right? Helping them understand where to look for information, how to find which information matters, then what to do with it. Now they're getting all of that at their fingertips. Throughout the sales process, they are using an internal tool that just our team uses that has, again, all of their notes, recommendations, things that they need to ask next time, recommendations for their exit criteria as well. Like, hey, you've actually seems like you got the technical win. Do you want to mark that off in Salesforce? And then from a post-sales perspective, it's been incredible for our growth strategy team. So they actually get all of their account handoff notes auto-generated for them. So they're not chasing down the GTME to figure out what happened in what conversation and, any of that. And then from there, actually, those notes power an automated kickoff deck that is created via Clay. So all they have to do in Slack is type in /impact review in the domain of the company. And then an entire deck is generated for them to have that customer kickoff call. And it fills in the logo, their photo, everything that was discussed in the pre sale cycle, the use cases that they decided on, and recommendations for implementation. So it's really incredible to see one, how many efficiencies we're able to increase. And then two, from my view, I'm like, oh my God, you got everyone to use the same deck and it looks beautiful. Like that I've been trying to do for I don't know how many years. And now they can just focus on strategically what they want to put in there. And it's also less of a battle, right? Trying to get them the new deck or consistent
Yeah.
branding and things like that.
That is a
Yeah.
dream. Get
Dream,
everyone.
dream.
Dream. So talk a little bit about the enablement tech stack that you have today. You're using Notion to manage your content. I think so many enablers that I talked to today are like, do I need an LMS still? Is this still a thing? What are your thoughts on the need of an LMS? And do you have an LMS and where are you on that journey?
Yeah, we currently don't have an LMS. We are looking for an LMS, but that's really been the conversation the last quarter of what metrics do we care about? Are there other ways that we can look for these and measure success during ramp and after ramp outside of an LMS? Because now it's less about having like your perfect even CMS, right? I was so like I had all the tagging, all the governance, all of the meetings set up. Now it's less about having them actually log into Revenue Center, which we do have, and it is in Notion. It's more about meeting them where they're at. So in Slack, they can use a tool that we use called Dust, basically query any information that they want, and it's pulled from that database. So it's more how I think about it now, making sure the information is maintained and updated. It's going to be accessible to them in different ways than we kind of historically operated. And same for an LMS. We're kind of looking beyond that and looking at more actual deal activity pipeline metrics than just consumption metrics within the LMS. And a lot of it is live, as I mentioned. So you know who's in the
Yeah.
room.
Yeah, that's true. The live element helps a lot from an LMS perspective. A follow-up question though, I'm on board with you. Like I think an
Mhm.
LMS is becoming very quickly outdated in a lot of ways. Like it's just not how people learn or absorb information. Like I don't know that tests or content views are like what you need to track,
Mhm.
but I know not everyone's on board with that. Do you get pushback from like the product teams or other teams that like have historically relied on those stats at other companies that you don't have an LMS in place? Or is that you feel like you're driving down enough of like that data driven strategy that you've kind of like ironed out some of those
Yeah,
expectations?
we haven't gotten that pushback. Not to say it won't come, you know, probably tomorrow now that you mentioned it. But, no, we're looking at more like product adoption and more at what was the intention of the training? What's the behavior we're trying to drive? Are they actually, we use a lot of Gong trackers, a lot of initiative boards. And also that's going to tell me more than if they came to the training. So, I want to understand as well. We're kind of trying to look at it as well through AI of if you know the product, I'm okay if you test out of the session. That's kind of how we're thinking about it as well. So if you can speak accurately to this product and get a customer to adopt it, I don't really mind if you looked at the playbook, if you learned via, a skill that you're chatting with, whatever it may be. I just want to give you all of the options and then really kind of test your ability from there.
That right there is the future. If we
Yeah.
could all just be able to like meet people where they're at.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's a reality though of like money hides all sins, right? Like it's really easy when you're a growing company, and I've been in those situations to like push people outside of the norms that they've been in because everything's moving forward, and so there's a lot of support there, and I think there's probably other people sitting in other companies that like if your product isn't being successfully sold and you haven't figured out if it's like the brand awareness or the enablement, like then they want all of these certifications and LMS stats and stuff. And so it's good to see how you're thinking about it holistically, not that just you're selling a lot and it's working, but like you're actually looking at the stats to make sure that you're driving the right behavior still underneath it all.
Yep. And even, we did our pricing launch recently and it was so funny. I did a daily knowledge check, but I didn't call it a knowledge check. I called it the Price is Right daily. And all of a sudden, it was no longer a quiz, it was a game and everybody was so competitive. And I didn't do anything differently except maybe marketed it a little bit differently to my internal teams. So that's kind of an example of like, was I, maybe not driving attendance as closely as I might have been with access to the LMS, but I was able to get everybody to take that quiz, everybody to get the right answer, and everyone to understand how to speak accurately to the changes. But that was a learning for me and my team. I mentioned to them it's sometimes more a little bit about branding than it is actually doing something so wildly different.
Okay, so we're hitting the end of our episode, and this is the point where we ask our guest to help our listener create their own point of view. And we do this by having you ask them a question they should think about over, the next 24 hours. What's something that will help them create their own point of view?
I would say think of what is one thing that you do every week that could potentially be automated, whether it be creating your weekly newsletters, importing trainings, whatever it is that you're doing on a recurring basis, challenge yourself to think of if there's a way to do it differently. I think it's easy sometimes to just keep going into our routines. And sometimes it's hard to pause and think, what are some different things I could do?
Yeah, it's a good
Well, I
reminder.
think everyone is going to be asking you about this Notion content updater because,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Clay on Clay story. I think you're going to be getting some asks about that too.
Melina, how do people find you if they have those questions or want to connect with you? What's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, best way would be LinkedIn. Happy to connect.
Great. Love that.
Amazing. Well, if you are not following us today, make sure you're following us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Melina, thank you for being on the episode today. I think we all learned a lot. It's so interesting to talk to individuals at these fast growing AI companies because you are the thought leaders in what we should all be thinking about and doing. So thank you for giving us the space and the time.
Thank you for having me.